We don't have to have it all together to be called by God, and that is beautiful. You're listening to The Well Within, a podcast for sensitive souls who are choosing faith, courage, and authenticity every single day, even when it's messy. I'm your host, Sosa, and together we're having real conversations about trusting God with our whole selves, our hearts, our hopes, and our dreams. So let's go deeper right now. Hi family, it's your girl Sos and welcome back to The Well Within. It has been such an interesting week. I found myself this past week at a conference that was centered around creativity, and I met a whole bunch of women, particularly women who grew up in the church, women who are Christian entrepreneurs, and I found it fascinating because we all identified with one thing, which was being the good girl or being the good woman in the creative space and what that actually meant for us. And I figured that a lot of the similarities we had was because we were raised in the church. And so we created this holy girl, good girl identity, or what I call the good girl gospel, which kind of made us play nice in certain realms and certain atmospheres in the church, and that translated into how we run our businesses today. And so I often find myself trying to escape that mold in my business. And I've since realized that playing nice isn't necessarily something that is holy. And so let me be honest, I was raised in a very strict Pentecostal church, as most of you know, where holiness sounded more like a little bit of a hush-hush. And later, when my dad became a pastor and I became a pastor's kid, I would be everybody's volunteer. I would be in the choir. I would do Sunday school. I would babysit kids. I would be in charge of the food or the ushering. And there's so many things I said yes to because I didn't want to disappoint. And I thought being agreeable was being humble. Let me tell y'all something. I even used to leave school. I was in college about an hour away. I used to leave school and come down to the church to serve and go back to school, even at certain inconveniences. It got so bad to the point where I moved schools just so I could be closer, right? And I was really silent about how uncomfortable that made me feel because I thought the silence was submission. But here's the cost of being silent: anxiousness, burnout, resentment, and even losing track of what obedience to God looks like, because I wasn't obeying God, I was obeying people. And so here's what I need you to hear from me today: that playing nice, it's actually killing us emotionally, physically, psychologically, and even in our businesses. And so this episode is really about breaking free from this good girl gospel, this good woman narrative. This narrative that tells women that being godly means to shrink and to please people and break ourselves into pieces to keep everyone whole. Galatians chapter 1 verse 10 says, "Am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? If I were trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." And if we're real, if we thought about Jesus, if Jesus walked into our churches today, a lot of people would call him arrogant, right? In Matthew, he flipped tables. Imagine Jesus walked into your next women's conference. Somebody would have escorted him out, okay? But I think that moment that Jesus flipped table was actually a moment of humility and not arrogance, because humility is submission to God, right? And it's not passively submitting to people. And it's not just making people comfortable. And so this good girl gospel has really disciplined us into compliance. And that's why we're tired. That's why we're resentful. That's why some of us feel invisible in our own lives. And so I'm going to give you some radical examples of breaking free and why it matters, right? Why it matters. And so we have this habit of constantly wrecking our body with stress, destroying our sleep, killing our creativity, because we're constantly saying yes. It's death by 1,000 yeses. And so this same cycle shows up in work. You take every client, every gig, every partnership, even the ones that wreck your peace, because you're afraid saying no makes you look like you're ungrateful, or saying no makes you feel like you will not have an opportunity. But Psalm 127 verse 1 says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. And so the first radical step to being free of this good girl gospel is to say no. Second, speak your truth even when it costs you. Staying silent keeps your nervous system in survival mode, right? You swallow anger, you store shame. Resentment is even like simmering under your skin. And in business, silence makes you lose respect and money. It also looks like allowing clients to exploit you, allowing businesses to underpay you, allowing companies or businesses to silence your ideas. You bite your tongue because you don't want to seem difficult, okay? This looks a lot like spiritual abuse in the church, right? Because leaders use scripture to exact control, to silence questions, to punish us, right? And so they'll say things like, don't talk about it, just pray about it. Silence is compliance with sin. In the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 16, Esther risked her life to tell the truth. Regardless of the shame, regardless of what would happen, she opened her mouth to tell the truth. And she did it in a very strategic way. Another point that I want to give you to break free from this good girl narrative is to stop dimming your light in male-dominated spaces, okay? We get labeled rebellious for being bold. You've been told you too much. But when you dim your light in these spaces, it chips away at your confidence. It creates imposter syndrome. And to be honest, it keeps you financially underpaid. Every apology for your gift, it's a withdrawal from your own self-worth. And let me say that again. Every time you apologize for the gift inside of you, you're withdrawing from the bank of your own self-worth. Matthew 5:14 says, you are the light of the world. So stop deflecting compliments. Stop deflecting praises. Don't say it was nothing. Say, yes, I worked hard. God gave me the vision, and that is for his glory and his praise. Testify about the goodness of God in your life and not be silent about it. And then lastly, suppressing your calling creates anxiety. Sometimes it even creates physical illness. Studies even show that unfulfilled purpose increases stress and lowers resilience. And in business, it keeps you broke and it keeps you bitter, okay? This is when you hide your book or delay your launch or water down your vision because you don't want criticism. And to be honest, not wanting criticism is stepping back into that good girl narrative, right? For years, I delayed stepping into my voice because I didn't want to look a certain way. And a radical shift is choosing your calling over the comfort. Fire that person who disrespects you. Launch the brand even when people don't get it. Obedience to God is not a group vote. It's not a group vote. It is a radical shift towards you and the relationship that you have with God. And so tonight, I want you to go in your journal and I want you to write down all the places in your life where you're mistaking approval for righteousness. Pick one place where you're still performing the good girl role, whether in church, at work, in the business, in the boardroom, and then pray about it and let God lead your steps. In order for us to build confidence in ourselves as women, we have to let God lead. Sometimes we think confidence is us stepping out, but if you don't have the covering of God, you're going to fail. And so obedience is, God, this is where I'm struggling. This is where I'm burnt out emotionally, physically, spiritually. But I know that you are able to pull me out of this burnout. And I think it's important that as we are building our businesses, we're committing our actions to Christ and learning that Christ dictates our footsteps. The Lord blesses the works of our hands. And so I want to encourage you today, if you haven't thought about breaking free from this good girl narrative, that you look at your life and really ask yourself, am I pleasing the Lord or am I pleasing other people?